front end now, integration testing. Now we have a lot of front end focused UI and UX, a lot of communication services. We have a lot of rendering. We have a lot of things happening in the DOM with React, right? Suppose we do a small component to render out a list of addresses. I just want to look at that component. I want to test not the whole screen. I want to test that guy. And maybe inside of that address component, there's a get request to get addresses. I want to test all those methods in my component, and I also, or functions, and I also want to test how it renders out in isolation, right? So that is one benefit of this package called Jest, right? And if you've ever used other packages, I've used .NET Test Explorer, .NET NUnit is XUnit, NUnit from .NET. I've used Mocha a lot. Mocha is pretty good. It's more problem with Mocha, especially running on the node level, is you know, it doesn't have access to the window, so you can't do a lot of things for the front end. But Jest is kind of can be designed for front end, right? So I mean, you still may need to mock the window. You will need to mock things, but it has like added features for front end. So let's look at that particular website to start. So fast, safe code coverage, easy mocking, pretty explicit in terms of you know, to be strict equal match snapshot. The interface is pretty easy to use. And then obviously in here somewhere we need to get started, right? So getting started, just obviously installed Jest. Now, this would be something that would be a dev dependency, right? So you can do --save -dev, or the short form is install Jest -D, right? That'll install as a dev dependency. And then you're off and running. I took the liberty somewhere here of creating a project already. And again, this is based off the tutorials for today. If we look at them here. First one is just getting started with testing, right? In general. Create your project, install the dependencies. This should come with React. Jest should already be installed. However, the Jest DOM may be something that you may need. And what comes in there is some of those snapshot testing that we'll use in part 2. At the bare minimum, and I don't know if we've ever talked about this, I might have mentioned it, it's just because we're doing React, it doesn't mean that we can't have other JavaScript functions that are floating around, other JavaScript files, right? Like the component.jsx is for rendering, and you mix your logic inside of the component, but many times, and I'll show you a more advanced test I did for my own workplace, because I was thinking about testing, so I added it for the first time to their project. So you can have standalone projects that might be used for logging, or for the one I was talking about, it's a session service or session storage service that deals with putting and getting from session storage or local storage, right? So I created a whole service around it, which is just a class that has methods that every component can use. So that would be a very good reason to break away from a React component and have something central. So this is what's showing you that you could just have a very simple JavaScript file called sum.js. It does something, adds 2 numbers together. And then to test that it works, instead of loading it into your UI or loading into a component or loading into your web page and trying to invoke it with JavaScript, right? That would be the way to interact with it normally, is like, let's see if it works. Try to like call it through the console log, like try to manually trigger it. But if you have Jest installed and you give it the file name .test.js, it'll search the tree and it'll actually run your test, right? So what that looks like is I already have a couple already running here somewhere. So many windows open. Let's just look at this tutorial here. And that was something else I was looking at. We'll look at later in terms of styling. I went ahead and created a Jest project, and you can see when I installed it. So this should already come as part of dependencies with a React project, right? But I did need a few things in the intermediate lab to make this work. I don't have the summary, but I have something else called reverse string. And there's my little module right there. It's just a function. And all it does is take a string and just reverses it. That's all it does. I don't know if it works. I'd have to put it in my UI and trigger it through the UI. But I don't want to do that because, if you're working on a production app, you got to somehow trigger it somehow. But I want to call it in isolation via test. So I have a simple test against it. And all it does is I pull in that module called reverse string. And then you can see the syntax is really easy, right? Test reverses a string. I expect that if I call reverse string with A, B, C, D, I expect it to be reversed. That's a very simple, happy path, right? And all I need to do here to check all of my tests, by the way, I have a lot of tests here. So if I just go npm test, it's going to go through and scan the project. Should call Jest. And ideally, it should actually go and run all of my test projects. But I have them all mixed in here. So it's determining my test suite. It found a bunch already. I don't know why this is lagging a bit. I think I forget the command. You can actually target one test instead of running the whole suite. So I think you can actually say npm test and then the name of the test. We'll let that chug for a minute. I don't know how long. I have so many things running. We'll let that chug. So npm test to run, and that would at least isolate your JavaScript file. And then the next step would be to create a simple React component and that has JSX, and then how to actually call that guy. All right, so I go back here, and this guy is saying, let's see where I'm at here. I am it's saying something here. It doesn't like me right now. Found one test, but what I want to do is run all the tests. And for some reason, this guy is only finding app.js. Why is that? That's really weird. Let's see the directory I'm in. I'm in the material UI, of course. That's why I'm not even in the right directory. So make sure you're in the right project directory because I was switching projects, right? Okay. So let's start again. Go back, right click and open an integrated terminal window. So now we're in the Jest app. Let's make sure we're actually in the right directory here. Okay, npm test. I think when I ran npm test, it found the default, which always comes set up. That's not what we wanted. We should have about 17 tests here or something like that. So again, it's going to scan the tree. It should find, so you can see it finds 6 tests. And it's going to try to run them all. Just give it a bit of time, but it did find them because you can see they're all different tests. I have a couple component tests. I have a couple just module tests for the reverse string. It's chugging a bit, but it is scanning through and it should run them all in a bit. So you can see now it's going through all of the different ones. So I have 4 tests passing. So now I have fully 12 passed. So 6 test suites, 12 passed, 2 snapshot tests passed, and it took 25 seconds. Now, this is a very small set. I've had, when you have 500 Mocha tests, it takes sometimes like a while to run. Like literally, you kick it off, you go get a coffee kind of thing, right? Then you need to if you're just working on your component, you can just target the test to run against your component. I think that is, I forget what Jest, but with Mocha, you just say run Mocha and then the name of the component. The name of the test, it'll just isolate that test. Because if you run them all, then you're going to be waiting for a while. And if you've ever seen the other step to it is E2E, end-to-end test, which involves I don't know if does anybody do end-to-end tests? No? So that's something else to talk about. Those tests, I kid you not, took about 20 minutes to run. And you're literally just kick it off and run it. And then you could only submit your work when all the tests have passed. So I'd be like, oh, I have to kick off that, make sure everything passes, and then I can go like this, right? Let's take a look at the package.json again. I forget if anybody remembers here. I think it's so we're calling React test. I think if I went like this and I said reverse, I forget the matching. There's some matching keyword if anybody can remember. How do you target how do you target one test? Let's see here. Running a command line, notify, additional config. I want to just target one particular test. Let's see. Good old Google, right? How to target one just test file. How do I ignore one test? How do I? There was a way to. There's an ignore function as well. You could ignore skip. You can skip all these different tests. How do I run just a single test in Jest? Jest minus T, and then the name of your component. That's what I was looking for. So it's a minus T flag. So right here, I go minus T. So match this test case, and then I want to just call the reverse strings. Reverse string. Let's see if that guy works. I'm hoping it'll run just two tests. Found 7. It skipped 12. Okay, so we're doing good. Did it skip all of them? It might have skipped all of them. So it skipped all of them, but it's working. So it skipped 13, nothing ran. So I think it needs to be explicit where we're going to be saying reverse string dot test dot js. See if that guy works here. Let's try to only test to trigger a test. Ran all test suites with the name test matching reverse string. So for some reason am I getting here reverse string? So for some reason it's not, I'm actually matching myself out. Okay, well, either way. I just ran all the tests again. So the basic one was, the simple test was just reversing. So that passed, no problem. If you go back in and if you look at the actual output, you can actually get a whole output of what passed and failed. And then I got a little bit deeper. I said, okay, you can use the describe. Describe is a way of kind of chunking your test together. Happy path is just, you do a couple tests like, I reverse the string, hello world, with special characters, with spaces. So you're just kind of just proactively just testing some happy paths, right? Maybe something a little bit more false, I guess, would be something like, instead of always expecting it to be equal, now you're going to test the other case where you're going to say, I expect it to fail, right? If I reverse empty string, I expect it not to be something, right? If I reverse a single character, it should not give me back 2 characters. And palindrome, I looked that one up, right? It's like string to be, if I reverse a palindrome, which is the same string either way, it should not be a totally different string. So you're just trying to hit edge cases in your mind. Sometimes when you're really thinking about this, if they give you time at work to work on this stuff, and you start to really think of different ways to break it, because you're thinking, I'm going to try to break my logic, you actually will find really interesting little problems that you never would have thought of. So if you're given time to unit test, it's good. Most times, time and money and budget don't allow you to just sit there and just do unit tests. The guy will be like, do that when you got time, right? Let's get it out. Let's get it out, right? Let's get that feature going because we gotta sell it, right? Or what have you. So there's a way so if you look at the markup, you're describing, you're testing, you're expecting it to be equal or not be, like the semantics are pretty nice. And that's just a simple JavaScript test, right? So now if we got a component. So let's look at our Jest lab here. Wherever it was here, the lab here. So I have a simple React button. And again, I could put this in the UI and try to manually click it. And a lot of times there's a lot of manual testing happens. But when you manually test, and I do it all the time, you do like a smoke test, right? It's like really kind of a wash over your feature, but you're not really hitting the edge cases, right? So I would render this, I would click it. I'm like, okay, it works. I put it in the console. I know it's working. I know it's clicking. I'm good. But programmatically speaking, you can use a couple things here. So you can write a test for the button itself, and you could say, okay, I'm going to pull in React. From the testing library, I'm going to pull in something that's going to help me called render and screen. And then I'm going to write a little test. It's going to say it renders using this. It's going to render in the test suite internally. Like it's not rendering anywhere, but the markup is rendering. So it'll call the function, because the function, that's why getting back to class components and functional components are, in the end of the day, just JavaScript functions that can easily be called. Whereas like a class component is a class. And what do you have to do to a class? You need to instantiate it. You need to like interact with it. Like you need to set it up. Where a function's a function, JavaScript, you can just call it. So that's why functional components with hooks are far more easy to test than the legacy class API, right? So all they're doing here is they're just rendering. We're calling this render method that's going to render the component. Internally, it'll call it like a function. It'll get back the JSX. They have a concept called screen. So the framework is mimicking or mocking a screen. It's just saying, okay, in memory, go grab that text as the button element and just say, does it exist? Does the element exist in the screen? It's kind of a way of testing without the UI. It's kind of a different concept, right? Because you're testing from the command line. You're testing from the server without looking at it. So you're not looking at anything, but your test runner is inspecting everything about that component. So it's a different way of thinking about it. People are very visual, so they want to see it sometimes, right? And when I did this feature I was working on even today, I visually went through and I made sure it worked. And then I went back to my test runner. But a funny story, I had a test runner where I was running and it was posting, right? It was like creating these things called packages. And I would run like 10 tests. Every time I ran it, it would create 10 post requests and create 10 new packages, right? So I didn't realize it was actually running under my account. So then I logged in and I said, like I saw all this mock data. I was thinking to myself, did I break? Am I mass spawning? Did my code like automatically like kickstart all like 100 packages? And then I realized, oh, that's the test results. So that should be running under another, like it was confusing to me because I thought maybe my code, whatever I did, triggered like this explosion of data, right? So it was the test runner that did it. So anyways, that was actually kind of interesting. That's why you use different accounts. I'll show you that test in a little bit if I can get that back. So there's our little component, and we're not even going to render it because we don't have any UI. I mean, we do have a UI, but I mean, it's an extra step. I'd have to like load it up, load it in the main entry point, kick it off, make sure it works. And even then, I'm just looking at it. Like I'm not checking. How do I check that the button? Well, I could visualize in the DOM that the label is there. So I could do that manually. But if I wanted to check or test that the events are fired, then I would have to do more coding to actually, or put a breakpoint in to validate that when I click the button or I submit a form, these events are firing. But Jest can help you with that too, right? So in the immediate and intermediate setup here, it kind of walks through a little bit that part of the ecosystem, you can install something called a React test renderer. So you're going to install another package that's going to help Jest. It's going to help with mocking rendering. So now you can do more, right? You can mimic click events against the components, like in memory. So it's kind of, again, it's a departure from visual UI. Now you're doing this in the pure coding realm, right? It's very different thought process because some people are very visual. They're like, I can't see it, so I don't know if it works, right? So we installed this test renderer, and one thing I found is it didn't work right out of the box because I went through this lab last night. And what I found is I needed to install this preset because Jest had a problem with JSX. This was I added this step because I realized it wasn't running out of the box. So I had to install Babel preset because the JSX was exploding in the test runner. It wasn't understanding what I was, like the snapshot testing was not working. This was for the snapshot testing. So when it actually translates the JSX, JavaScript XML, JSX, right? JavaScript extension language, people say XML, in case you see it somewhere on a test. So I needed to do that just to make the snapshots work. And I think I did another step, I'm not sure. So I installed Babel as a preset, and you can see it right here somewhere, right there. So I installed the Babel preset and this test runner. When I installed the Babel preset, did it come with a Babel config? No, it didn't. So I think we're okay. I thought there was another layer of configuration, but I think it solved it. When I installed that, then it worked. And then I was free to create now a button component, a button component that just has an event. So it has a click handler, that's it. But I want to test against it programmatically that if you trigger a click, that it actually fires. I don't know what happens, but you can actually listen to the fact that an event was triggered. It's pretty nice, right? So I don't know what happens after it, but I want to make sure when all the buttons or all the different things have a user action against it, that they fire. There's synthetic events, right? So then we created a test that just says, now we're using something called Jest function. That's what the Jest FN is. It's mimicking a function. And what we're saying is that when we click it, we expect, right? When we give in the, I guess we're passing that in as a prop, and we basically want to make sure that it calls back. That's what we're testing for. So we want to make sure it got fired. The event was fired. So, and then you say, I expect that mock function was called one time, right? And then the opposite of that could be, I expect that it wasn't called two times, right? You go back and forth, right? I expect it once, but then I expect it not to be greater than one. So you try to break it, right? If I do this, what happens? If I click it twice, I expect it to be called twice and not once. You try to break your test, right? So it's pretty effective for testing React components and Vue components, any front-end components, right? The snapshot testing I'll show is actually really, really useful. And again, if you're given time, it does catch errors, but you don't want to spend all your time unit testing, because it's good and it's bad, because it's something you could tell your manager and be like, "What are you doing?" "I'm unit testing." Like, it's such a smoke screen, right? Like, unit test. I'm not doing anything really, but I'm unit testing. But I'm not doing anything. I'm testing. But then at least they could say, well, let me see your unit tests. Okay. But you can actually write a lot of unit tests, right? Like, once you get it done, you can actually mass produce a lot of unit tests because they're kind of the same. But some people just say, I'm testing. I'm just testing. That means sometimes you're not doing anything, right? Yeah.
Yeah, people get called software test.
Yes.
Question.
Oh, yes. Yes.
This includes this.
So software testers, it's love-hate relationships with devs, because when you're creating and you're in this space of creating green, it's all green pastures. I'm creating. I got something, I love it. It loves me and it's going to go. But when it goes to testing, quality assurance, they find ways to break your creation, right? Which is good for the business, but for you, sometimes these things they find, if you have a really good testing crew, they will find all the edge cases. And some of them are just like there's so like it's like you have to rewrite your work to solve some of this stuff, right? Sometimes. So if you did this approach where you're testing as you're working, then you can actually say, I did my end of testing. And then when it hits them, you have another level of confidence that you've already tested your work. Now they'll hit it and you might resolve a lot of things before they even look at it. But if you just do something quick and hand it to them, what they do is they will say, okay, they'll give you back defects, right? So defects is everything that you need that's a problem with it. So your work might come back with like 10 defects and then you got to go and fix them, right? So they don't necessarily program, not all the time. Sometimes you got a technical QA group that do write some tests, but they might not work. They might not get into the code base. They might write the end-to-end tests. I'll go into that in a little bit. End-to-end is a little different. It's basically like automation testing, right? So, when the feature gets deployed, they kick off their automation tests. Everything automates, so they expect it to still work, which is really good. It saves them a lot of time. I remember we had an offshore team in India and they would manually do the smoke test every night, which was like hours every night of going through this thing. Every night they would give a report. Every single night. It was hours of manual testing, right? And we had to automate that because then you could just automatically run those test suites, but we weren't there at that point in time and things have evolved a lot now. But I remember when everything was manual. It's just like big projects, right? So it is useful. Again, not everybody's going to give you the time. I snuck in a Jest test to my current code base because for whatever reason they didn't have tests in there. So I'm like, this is a good opportunity. Put it in, and I actually thought they wouldn't allow Jest in there, but I guess I wrote it in a way where it's like, okay, well that makes sense. Let's put it in there. So now I have Jest installed, and then I'm going to try to build it out a bit more, right? We did the setup, which is just npm install Jest. Simple syntax, to be, expect, test, right? Sounds pretty self-explanatory. If you add a message when it fails, it'll say adds 1 + 2 to 3 failed, and then it has a callback, right? Ecosystem is pretty big. There's other plugins that may help you out. So there's something called Puppeteer. Puppeteer is for browser testing, part of that automation. Puppeteer is one. I talked about end-to-end. I used a tool called Cypress at the previous place. It's like a browser testing. You configure your test, and when it runs in the window, the browser's like running and it's like synthetically testing. And then when it clicks a component, then it navigates away. You would say, I expect the URL to be, /wallet. I expect that there's going to be a button there, right? When I click the button, I expect it to do something else. So you have all these test cases running in the browser, and that's what takes, like, I remember it took 20 minutes. It scanned through every workflow of every single edge case. And then not only that, you can go layers deep. You can say, okay, if I click this, I expect it to make a web request, right? I intercept it. I expect that it fired. I expect that it didn't fail. Now I'm going to go to mobile view, and then it actually will change the viewport. And now it's in mobile view, and then it scans the whole. Like you can get so complex with these tests. Visual. So like I'll quickly show. I'm familiar more with Cypress test suite. So let me see. The test runner would be. I don't know if I can show the in browser. I don't know if that's a good. There you go. That's not really a great picture, but you can see there's a single test that it's asserting, running in the browser, and you're seeing there that, as it's running, it'll actually type out something and trigger automatically, yeah. But you have to write the test though. So part of that is another layer to this. If you wanted to do this type of thing and help with automation, then you would have to go back to your components. And everywhere there's a component, you need to make sure that your elements have an ID, right? Or a test ID. Like this needs to be called button event, right? Whatever element. Everything needs an ID because when you write the test, you're selecting the IDs. Select the button, click, fire the event, listen for it. Then I expect it navigates away, right? Like in that example there with the text box, right? You'd have to have a selector, the component mounts. You select the text box, and then you have ways to like populate it programmatically, and then after that, hit enter. You simulate the enter. What happens after that? Then what do? You test that maybe now the search results are showing. So you say, okay, is my route / search results? Do I have a search grid? Is the grid have 10 records? Like you start really writing tests like this. I don't have Cypress examples. I don't have that particular code, but it looks like this. This is a test right here, right? So it's a little bit of a different syntax, but it's still the same. Like instead of expect, it has it keyword. CY means Cypress. So here you can see cy.visit. It's trying to change. It's trying to internally shift the internal browser to the home route. And you can see here it's trying to select by class. It's doing like CSS selectors. And then it's mimicking an enter, right? And then I expect the result to have a length of 100 records. So you just build these things out, mass build them, right? It's another test runner, and the test suite has that browser. So maybe a technical QA group might do end-to-end with Puppeteer or Cypress or what have you, but that means they know they're like more QA engineers. They're not testers, right? Because not all testers are coders. Yes. Sorry?
What does it take to be a QA?
So QA engineer is, I would say, like the best QA people I've worked with is like they're got a good attention to detail, patience, right? And some technical, like not, they don't get into the code, but they understand technology and they know their way around software, but they're also analytical, so they'll look at it from like a problem solving thing. Yeah, but those things make a good QA person, right? And a lot of people who don't go into programming, when I first started, I remember I got a job offer to be a QA analyst at like an online casino place. And then eventually, I got a lower paying job as a developer at a small company. And I remember I was like, you know what? I think I want to build stuff. So then I said no to the guy. Like I was shocked. He's like, what? What? Like, I think I'm going to take that one because I want to build stuff, right? But on the other flip side, I could have went there and then I would have been maybe a QA analyst or whatever. And it was like a really good company, right? So it all depends on what you want to do, right? So
Like what groups?
yeah, they basically they work also with, so they test your work. So they're not exactly your buddies, but they help you. But they also talk more with the project managers. Does the project look in a good shape? Yes. Can we release? Because the QA people are the ones that do the QA acceptance testing. They say, does this go to production or not? So their job is to make sure that it's ready, right? Yeah, still an important job, right? QA, until AI takes over, and then we're all out of it.
That's a fact.
But then you know what? The AI does not entirely understand the business requirements. I don't know if you've ever used some of this stuff. It constantly will give you mistakes and be like, I apologize, I'm sorry, because it doesn't understand context all the time. It gives you back stuff that you have to be specific and be, no, that's like, you have to know. Like, I know if I'm troubleshooting, it gives me something totally wrong. I'm like, no, like now that's not right. Didn't you mean this? Like, oh, I apologize. You're right. So you have to know enough to be able to correct it. So sometimes they might say, okay, we need to get this to production. It'll just pass every test. It'll just bypass everything, right? Like, I don't know, like, just like AI when they said, with the doomsday predictions with like the Terminator movie, it's like, we want to solve global warming. Well, how do we solve global warming? Well, humans are the ones that cause all the pollution, so therefore eliminate all the humans, and now we solve global warming, right? It's like very analytical. It makes a lot of sense, but there's no compassion or anything. It's just
So it's that is being
yeah, that's it. Or if you ever watched the Terminator 2, Skynet went online, and that's what they did. They sent the nuke out, right? And they blew up everything. So, but it was problem solving, and its head that solved the problem, right? So anyhow, not as grim or technologically kind of doomsday-ish. We'll go back to testing. So it does this kind of mock functions. We looked at the jest.fn for mocking functions. So in a way, you don't have to run through the complexity of a big transaction function. You can basically sub in a transaction function that just does something really basic like console log, or you just check, did it get called? You don't have to run through all the transaction that hits the database. You can just say, my function, when I click this button, it should fire that. And that's all I care about. That's why I'm testing it, because the transaction logic is another unit of testing itself, right? We have expectations, expect, assert. And then we get into snapshot testing a little bit. Just conscious of time, 7:30. So this is the one where I had a little bit of problem with, and that's where I needed the Babel preset that I installed here. And I also installed this React test renderer for it to work. And what did I do? So I created this user profile. Is that big enough again? I don't know. So not really a complex component, but it has some of that conditional. Now it's a little bit more involved. Before I showed you hide show, like if you had a hide show with the ampersand, you can hide, like you can, based on the value of that Boolean, you can show a fragment or not. Here is it saying, if there's a user, then using that question mark ternary, then I want to show this fragment, which is the username, user email. Otherwise, just show the other fragment. Else, the else condition is no user information available. And I want to test that this works. So I would have, looking at this, I'd have to test that if I have a user, this fragment will show. If I don't have a user, that fragment will show 2 tests there. But also, now I want to take a snapshot of it and then actually look at the markup. And I think in the test, so if you look at the test here, we have 2 things. It renders correctly when there's a user, and it renders correctly when there is no user. And I pulled in the renderer from React test renderer. And when I test here, so there's the data, which is an object, key value pair, name and email. When I do renderer.create, I pass in the value, and I grab that tree via JSON, and I basically look at that markup, whatever was rendered, and I match it with the snapshot via Jest. And just by running this test, Jest will go and create a snapshot. And the snapshot is found here under test snapshot. And you can actually see what it looks like. So you can see here that it's just markup, right? So it's just like so it's basically, I guess it's just internalizing, the test, right? So when it renders correctly, I don't know how it matches up. I would expect could be as simple as matching on the name of the test. So it's going to expect that markup. And then the other test is going to expect that markup. So it's going to trigger the component, it's going to render, and it's going to compare. Why is that valuable? In case somebody comes in and they go and they add some logic to your component that you spent a couple months on. With this, you can say you broke my component. It can't tell you. So if you had this in place that and it fails, it pushes them to fix their code instead of somebody somewhere down the line saying, a QA guy saying, oh, that component that you built is broken now. You broke it, right? So it's a way of protecting your component in a way, right? Because if somebody picks it up next week, put some logic in, and then your snapshot now is broken, your button or whatever is not showing anymore, they will be forced to fix it, or someone will know that the test failed, and they'll say, oh, why is the test failing? And they'll be able to track it back to that iteration, right? So then you're clear. You look better, right? You know. So it's a way of protecting yourself at the same time, your team, and it actually enforces everybody to not break anything. When these things are all in place, if you ever get the luxury of seeing something like this, you know when a feature goes out with all the tests passing, you guys at least know that if you guys did some kind of refactor or something like that, that you didn't break anything. So, I mean, that doesn't mean it doesn't, when it hits production, there can't be bugs, but at least you have some satisfaction of knowing that what we did didn't break the app. So that's the snapshot testing. So it takes a markup and it basically matches against it. Basically saying that, you know, we can use it with React or we can use it with Vue. They're mentioning fire event. So it's like capturing that synthetic event. It's just checking that it was actually fired once or twice. This is actually pretty useful. And I think in my example for my current workplace, this is a way of tearing down and setting up. So let's just say you had caching going on or something like that, or maybe you had some object and every time you run your test, it modifies the object, but then every time you want the next test to run, you need to clear that object, right? So I have an empty array, the test fills up the array. That filling up the array could make the subsequent tests fail because they're all expecting an empty array. So it's basically saying before all, do some global setup, after all, tear down, before each test, do a particular setup, like, you know, empty out the array or initialize something. And after each, you could tear down. Now, sometimes you don't care about this stuff. It's just, if you're writing your test and you find yourself constantly repeating yourself, then you could say, okay, can I use these hooks? I guess hooks, right? Basically lifecycle hooks of the tests. And then every time my test runs 1, 2, and 3, you know, the before each and after each have fired. So the next test can cleanly run. And obviously there's global setup, it's even better. So that feature is also in Mocha as well. So you'll find that there's a watch mode, which we saw. So like if you're changing your test, the watcher will fire. Super nice, right? When you initially start doing some Node.js scripts and you're running Node, you're going to realize that you don't have any watcher going on. And you're going to have to terminate calling program and then fire it again. And it's an awful kind of situation. It kind of reminds me of .NET, right? You're building, you got to stop, rebuild all the time, right? It's like server-side coding, right? And then I'm just adding this so you could do some parallel tests. I haven't used this yet, but just throwing that in there, watchers and parallel execution. 734, I think I'll quickly just go over a test I wrote that's a lot more complicated, but I'll just show an action before we kind of drop and move on to another topic. Let's see here. And I'm only showing this because this is just on my mind, right? Let's see here. So you can see all these tests ran. So what we did was we found in this project that we were using a lot of there's a module that actually has a lot of configuration. Like if you check a checkbox and you toggle something, and then you have your configuration and you go into the next screen, maybe you disabled the audio, which is probably why I'm having a lot of audio problems, because I was actually testing audio a lot. Disable the mic, enable the speakers, enable video. When I go into the next screen, all those settings should persist right into the app. So the way to do that, and a way to do that easily inside a browser, is the browser has what's known as the session storage and the local storage, right? And I probably already talked about this. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I have. But if you go to, and I don't have my app open, but I already showed some of it, right? You go to your browser tools. You go to your application, you go to your local storage, and you can see already these are all the things that Google is tracking me. What are they tracking me for? Putting all these, maybe analytics, some things are in there, right? Here's something going on here. If I go to session storage, I have nothing. Okay. What's the difference between local storage and session storage? Good interview question. Yes. So local storage will stay in the browser for a day. It could stay for like, I don't know what the max is, a month, a year. It could stay for a year, I guess, if you set it. Cookies persist longer. So there's the old concept of cookies. That's different. Cookies are still there. Web cookies stay around for a long time. That's where if you notice, if you go and you go look at exercise equipment, then you start going everywhere and then you see ads for exercise equipment. It's because they're tracking you in their cookies. Because that's what they do. They register you went to Amazon, you searched something, and now all these ads are scanning your cookies and like, oh yeah, this guy looked at, I don't know, Squishmallows, I don't know, whatever, right? Now I'm going to see all this stupid stuff everywhere I go. So if you want to get rid of that, just go clear your cookies. Local storage doesn't hang around for so long like that. Like cookies can last for a year. But the difference between session storage and local storage is when I close my tab, my session is cleared, right? So I guess a good example would be if I log in, I have a session, right? If I close my window or close my tab, that should be it. Like I should not be able to open my tab again and then auto log in. That's a good reason, right? Yeah. So session storage is only within the tab. You know how many QA bugs and managers and people have said to me, why can't we persist our session storage across all the tabs? I want to, that's how it starts. I want to log in here and go to the next tab and still be logged in. But essentially, each tab is a new window. And this is and you have to explain it to non-technical people. Like, it's a non-window. I can't like battle the logic of the built-in browser to make it work. Now, how do you make it work? You could then do all this crazy stuff like putting cookies in, but then you get into this realm of like some architecture kind of thing, right? Yeah. So like in that, I told you in the place I work for, right? The retail store. I'm recording, so I won't mention it, but they wanted when you logged on to you were, it's all mini apps. So I'm in the shopping cart. I want to go to the item page. There are different apps. The only way to transfer knowledge across is through cookies. That was the only way, right? Because when you're shifting over, it's as if like you lose a lot of the session because it goes to a brand new app. So we had to have a lot of cookies going on, right? Some of the things persisted, but a lot of times we had to use cookies. To make that work. Anyhow, I was getting out of the way. So if you're ever using local storage or session storage, you'll notice that it's a lot of hard-coded strings. Local storage and session storage. And you get into a very big kind of you get very much into the same pattern. I set something in local storage via key. I get it out of local storage. I want to remove it. If it doesn't exist, like you do all these different things, a lot of hard code strings. So what we did is we created like a service. So the service, it's kind of a complicated solution, but the service basically takes care of this thing for you. Once you define a key, you set it up once saying, okay, this will be a local storage key, and it has a default. And once I set it up, anywhere in the app, now we can use it. And the service will take care of the abstraction or abstract away the logic. So if I create a key like video service dot audio input, if I set it once, then all I have to do is call that key, that object, and I'll always get back what I want or set it or remove it. It's kind of complicated, but it actually works nice. Quickly show what it looks like in the code base. Video service dot value. So you can see here, these are the actual values of local storage. You can see storage keys. It's like got a nice namespace. Storage keys dot meeting dot share module dot value. And if I want to set it, I would put something to equal, and all of the getting and setting, all of the stuff that determines whether or not it's local storage has already been defined. And then we use it like this, as opposed to, you know, local storage dot get, and then the string. What's the string name? I don't remember. Share rate, and I got to do that every single time. Dot value, right? So instead of doing that, the service takes care of it. And then we basically just define the service. Again, this is a kind of a more in-depth thing, right? But we basically say, these are all the keys I'm going to use throughout the whole application. And they're going to be all the storage keys. And some of them I define up front. It's going to be a Boolean. It's going to be a string. It's going to be an object. It's going to be an enum. And they're going to have some kind of default value. And I even have something in there for like, you know, auto remove. Like if the value is not found, then auto remove it from session storage. So it's like a whole little service itself. And I'm not going to really scare you with the details too much, but I'll just show it quickly. Session storage, session storage, session storage, storage service, storage service, storage service, storage service. It's all TypeScript, by the way. So, you know, it looks, you know, we got a lot of different things going on here. It's all generic, and it's like, it's quite interesting, right? So basically there's classes of classes of classes. So I define a storage key, and this is getting into something high level called generics, right? But at the end of the day, internally, there is the getter and setter. So there is the session storage and there's the local storage. And you have a get and a set. So if I want to retrieve, you call the get. If I want to set something, I call the setter. And then it takes care of all that typing. Because we're in TypeScript, the typing is a problem now. Typing in JavaScript, we don't care. But in TypeScript, it's like, if you want a number, you got to give me a number, or you got to do something called casting, right? So this does all of that. So if you don't care about the implementation, you don't look at the implementation. You just use it in the way that it is meant to be used, really, really nicely. All the logic is abstracted away from you. Somebody sets a key up, it'll work as expected. And based on its configuration, it'll just work, right? But how did I actually prove that it worked aside from manual testing? Then I wrote a big suite of tests against it, just to, you know, I just did it one day because I was like, you know what, I'm bored and I want to do this, and I'm already talking about it, and I want to put this test in place. And honestly, by doing that, I caught a little edge case that I was talking about PRs. So somewhere I have a pull request here going, and somewhere in there, I caught a little bug, right? So just through the case of iterating on it and running the tests, I caught a particular defect around this Boolean getter setter, right? and it just saved the bug from QA. It just saved QA from giving me a bug. So sometimes writing unit tests, you'll catch a lot of stuff because I tried to break it. And just looking at the test cases, you can see there's just so many of them here. I had to mock the storage because, again, we don't have the window at this point. I mocked the global storage by giving it some object, and you just see here, here it's just going through each one, right? Describing, go through this key before each clear out the storage, and then I basically go through this. Is it empty? Should it set a value? Should it remove a value? Does auto remove work? And basically, I repeat that 4 tests for every type, and then I have 30 tests. So that's why I'm saying, sometimes unit testing can be really like just quantity. But at the end of the day, I could say, you know what? Look, we went through all this, 19 tests pass, and I have when I go to run this again, maybe a month from now or 2 months from now when I forget about it, if I see all this stuff break, I know somebody changed something, and then I know ahead of time I got to fix it, right? When you have a lot of good tests, I'll wrap up. When you have a lot of good tests, you can tie it into this continuous integration cycle. And then I said, you would see, there's something. I don't have DevOps working like that, but at the bank, the last place, you would see something like this. And you would see when you broke the build, because it would be red, and you would be like, Jenkins would say, everything is green. All my tests have run. You can see the testing run, Jest testing run, browser tests have run. Now it's going to dev. Now it's going to staging and production. Beautiful, beautiful. But when you break a test, you know right away, because your build breaks, your PR is red, and now they're going to say, your code is good, but now you got to go fix those tests. Otherwise, it's not making its way to QA. So anyhow, to wrap up, so we went through all this: assertions, running tests, snapshot testing. I mean, I'll just say this on this note is unit testing is good when you have the time. If senior developers actually try to work it into their daily thought process if possible. I'm certainly trying to do more of it. Before, I used to hate it, but then I didn't realize the value of it until I was forced to do it. And now I kind of feel a little bit like exposed when I have a feature that doesn't have any tests against it. I feel like you're basically saying, I think it's done, and throw the ball to the QA guy and just be like, there you go. Now it's in your court, and then you don't know what can come back in a way. You manually smoke test it, but when I have this level of testing against it, then I feel better about the work that I did, right? So try to use it if possible. That's it.